supposedly introducing the distinguished speaker of the day, I find it rather difficult to do it because the speaker is very close to me. I would like her to call what? Lekha is, of course, formerly a student, but I think she's more like my daughter in a sense because we have such close association. And she's so distinguished that I don't feel like saying that. This is the way I thought I should say. But then she's so distinguished, I shouldn't be saying that, at least in public. So, and again, introducing someone in the era of Siri and, Google and all those things, it's a very difficult. And you know that the most difficult task here for the teachers is to go beyond information. And we are all here, even at my time also. Not that we were anyway different. We were all rated on the basis of how much information you could keep in your head. That was the criteria in which we were evaluated. So many of the students, when they go back, they note down a lot of information, which year our LSGs were formed, how many LSGs are there, and how many women are there. It's all information-wise wonderful. And from information, that's only raw material. It's only raw material. From information to insight, or from information to knowledge, and from knowledge to wisdom. And PhDs are supposed to bring forth wisdom. They are supposed to come with insights, at least some knowledge. So when you're introducing someone also, if I am to repeat all what is in this heavy curriculum vitae, which is available for public consumption, I'll be making a mockery of myself, which I don't want to do. So this is there, all of you. I'm sure I told you that before reading anyone, the first thing that you should be doing is knowing who the person is. This is what the distinguishing characteristics of GIF scholars is, that they will not read someone without who is the person whom they are reading. Similarly, I'm sure they all would have heard and read a lot about the speaker of the day. So I am not here to introduce you, but at the same time, since I was invited to be here, and I also have to rush for a Viva OC, so I would like to say a few things, like not introducing. I would like to say that as far as the way in which Professor Lekha Chakraborty has academic trajectory, that is something which each one of you should try to aspire. Here is a person who is going to talk to you, whose academic trajectory is something that each one of you should try to accomplish. You should try to achieve the same trajectory. That's the only thing which I want to say. And when I am talking, why I'm saying what I'm saying, that is what you should look more into her biodata. I think there is everything that an academician of much higher of her age, I think in terms of her accomplishments and her age, she has been much ahead of the time that she has spent in academics. What many people have not succeeded, even at the fag end of their career, she has been able to accomplish in terms of, say, publication, in terms of accomplished by way of international exposure. That clearly indicates which I often use, the interactive learning space that she has. And each one is different because the quintessential difference between two individuals or two institutions is the interactive learning space surrounding them. That is the most distinguishing characteristics So to that extent, she has an interactive space in terms of her uh, 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 interactions with national policymakers, international, national academic community, international policymakers, multilateral associations, and you name it, she is there. And more importantly, in terms of her high profile writing, not only in academics, but also to the wider community by way of journalism, because I know that many people, they get excited by writing in journalism, because I remember a long time back, Ashok Desai, when he left Delhi School of Economics and joined Business Standard. I asked him, how do you like it? She told, look, I am read by at least 100, at least 1,000 times people more than what I am read in academics. And I am paid at least 10, 20 times more. I am paid at least 10, 20 times more than what I am paid in academics. So very often what happens, you get, okay, I'm going to give I'll stop here. Very often people get carried away by that and they stop academics. But here is a person, she keeps her both legs firmly and properly in both. And all the more what I like her of is the manner in which she promotes youngsters. One of my own students, Janet, she was so, I don't think that I ever promoted Janet like she promoted. And many of you know that, that this is all evident from her biodata and the people whom she works with. So I think she has all the essential attributes of an academician. First of all, she's not keeping well today. I was talking to her. She's on antibiotics. She's having, yet she doesn't want to, withdraw from her committee. I told her, look, you can come later. No, I'll do it today. The basic commitment to profession that got manifested in all the essential attributes that an academician should have. So, Lekha, I take pride in you, in fact. I'm very happy that I have been able to kind of be close to be with you. And I know you have you have much more to accomplish in your this thing. And here I will tell you one thing is that, we are talking about macroeconomic policy, response to policy crisis. I will try to provoke you. I would have loved to stay back because unfortunately I already agreed for a YOS, which is scheduled in the afternoon. Because of another afternoon, I wanted to go to change it in the morning. So they just go to do it at 10:30. So one thing which I wanted to provoke you is by way of our coursework, where do we stand? So the way in which we do coursework is slightly different. You know that in CDS, when we were doing the coursework, 10 to 11:30 one module, 11:30 to 12:30 another module, and after 2:30 to 3:30 another module. I know these kind of all 3-4 modules running together in a most intensive manner. And we have 24 modules at that time. I don't know the kind of nightmare that we all had to live with. But what we are going to have a very relaxed learning environment wherein we have 3 to 4 months of fundamentals of but foundation course and research methodology. So much so that during the first month of the coursework, suppose a teacher is asking to read an article which talks about G-arch model or some multinomial or whatever, they know it. Otherwise, you'll have to wait for research methodology is a course that runs through, say, 8 months. So you'll have to wait till 8th month to know what is G-arch model, ARDL model, this model, that model. But the teacher will be talking about it the first month itself. So we have started with the fundamental, with foundations and research methodology. So much so that you can use any econometrics today. My students will be, they should be knowing. They should be knowing. If they do not know, we will degrade all of them. Then after that, we started with the fundamentals, the foundations of public economics. And that is the only one module that is running for 2 months. And wherein they are supposed to get exposed to all the fundamentals, and we are trying to get exposed them to as many renowned scholars as possible. We had Pauline Mayak, we have M.G. Gondarao, we have got Mehman sir, and we have now Lakhinda may be coming. I'm asking to Kavita ji. Yesterday she will become Professor Kavita Rao, and we are calling to some others also. So idea is that in here also, this is actually, this course is, the lead instructor is Ranjit, and other faculty are also, Dr. Ranjit is leading the course, and others are also at their level contributing to the course. That is what we are trying. So you are, and I think one major central question that we are concerned about here is, when you're talking about public economics and public finance, can we consider public economics is something, is a very homogeneous animal, regardless of the country, its stage of development, in stage of its characteristic, it is the same. To what extent we do in India have a public economics, public finance oriented to a developing economy context? So do we need, to what extent we have succeeded that? So how do we articulate a public economy? You know that, Raghavendra and others talked about macroeconomics for developing economies. So similarly, Raja Chalaya asked in his 57 book, even before Musgrave, he talked about public economics for an underdeveloped economy, his title. So this is something which we thought we should think a lot more than, not that it has not been addressed. So this will be a challenging task which we take it as a collective effort. And I think if you can kind of enlighten them, provoke them, and if they don't provoke, they will provoke you. It doesn't matter who gets provoked, why. I'm only concerned about the outcome, that's all. Someone should get provoked, that's all. So I think I will stop here. I think just a little more of an introduction than what I expected. 15 days gone, 15 minutes gone. I'm sorry about it. It is, so thank you very much, with a lot of a loving welcome and affection, and I welcome you for this lecture.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. It's really homecoming for me. And when you said that she's my daughter, I felt so happy. And thanks for provoking me by asking the right questions. That can macroeconomic policy and public economics be a homogeneous animal without looking into the realities of an emerging economy? And I find it so useful when you explained the course structure and the way you are going to provide the course to the students, starting the research methodology right from the beginning. I particularly enjoyed it because I do remember that we all, learned the econometric methodology only at the end of the course, and it affected our learning process. And as you mentioned, it was our journey from looking into the theory, then into the data and the empirics, and the way you helped me to, get the insights from that and to move ahead, rather than collecting the data and put it in your pocket and move ahead. As you said, that many students do look at the data and just enjoy the data and go ahead. But the perspectives and the insights, that's a way, as you mentioned, the interactive learning space will help. And the youngsters, of course, they can provoke me. And, that's it. And my topic today about the polycrisis, exactly fitting into that concern of yours about how can the macro policy making be just homogeneous without looking into the context specific issues. How can the macroeconomic policy makers focus on business as usual when the country or the global economy is undergoing a polycrisis? And this concern was first raised by Adam Tooze. He made this term popular, the polycrisis. It's not exactly about the multiple crisis because it's about, as he mentioned, the entire is more than, adding up or the sum of the parts of this crisis. When we talk about the polycrisis in terms of, inflation, the global inflation, which is mounting, we have war, we have geopolitical risk, we have hunger, and many of the achievements in the macroeconomic realm that's getting reversed because of this polycrisis in terms of geopolitical risk or the climate crisis, the energy crisis, and of course we have seen a pandemic. So this is a post-pandemic era, and we have seen the stagflation risk, and also about the supply chain disruptions and the macroeconomic instabilities. So how to deal with all these crises? when we talk about this polycrisis, the business as usual by the central bank focusing just on inflation targeting will not do. And the fiscal policy authorities focusing on the fiscal rules and to have a fiscal norm of the deficit to 3% of GDP will not work in the times of polycrisis. So what could be that macro policy responses or the economic policy responses we need to look into to tackle this economic, political, and ecological issues together? That's a concern when we talk about this polycrisis. And around the world, economists are getting increasingly aware of this issue and how to take the global economy to a just transition mode in terms of the climate crisis and other crisis. So that's exactly what we need to look into. Of course, I understand that the gift, the core structure is based on an heterodox paradigm. It's not just like the way the orthodox or the neoclassicals think. And I know that Dr. Ranjit and Dr. Sumaleta, who is working on the core structure, they have put the elements into it from the heterodox school of thought. Otherwise, we won't be able to take the global economy to the next level. So that awareness for the PhD students from the gift is what I value most, rather than, getting into too much of a mainstream neoclassical literature. And there are, different meetings happening around the world, not only in the World Economic Forum, a side event about this polycrisis. London School of Economics is talking about, and many heterodox economics schools of thought or schools are talking about it. And recently, there was a major meeting happened in Overseas Development Institute, ODI in London. And my former director, Ratin Roy, he was the managing director of ODI that time. He invited me for that meeting there. Adam Tooze, Professor Adam Tooze was there. He's, as I mentioned earlier, he's the professor who coined or who made this term polycrisis popular. And he's from the Columbia University. So you can read his works to understand this term polycrisis in depth. And also you take a look into the recent, the global risk report to understand this term polycrisis better. So now the world, we are thinking together to take it to the next level, not in terms of just the economic growth. We are not just tackling the economic growth crisis, or the graduation dreams will be just focused on the GDP, but we have to look into the other crises as well. And this global inflation is mounting, and now the central bank is focusing more and more on the price stability issues globally. And by mandate, they are supposed to look into the price stability issues, especially in the times of, the mounting global inflation. But at the same time, one central bank of the world, that is a Fed Reserve, if you look into their policies in detail and also the Jackson Hole policy meetings, the narrative, you can understand that one central bank of the world is triggering or promoting the global recession by keeping the interest rates hawkish. And the emerging economies, they have no way out but to keep the interest rate defense. Otherwise, the capital will be flighty and the inflation is mounting. So they won't be able to decrease or to maintain the status quo in the interest rates for the growth promoting activities, because they need to keep up the tandem with the Western world. That is a Fed Reserve. But recently, the Jay Powell of Fed Reserve mentioned that he's in a mood to decrease the interest rate. So if that is the case, once again, the central bank will be thinking about the growth recovery process. Otherwise, it's all based on one paradigm. That is a rules-based paradigm with the central bank. They're looking into the price stability by pegging the policy rates to a nominal anchor of inflation identified for a specific economy or a specific country. Then the unobserved variables like inflationary expectations and output gaps were captured through econometric and the survey methodology, and they're focusing just on inflation targeting mode. But if we fail to anchor the expectations channel, then the supply side shocks, because as I mentioned earlier, in the time of geopolitical war, geopolitical risk and war, the supply side shocks and the disruptions are huge. And you have read in papers that how we are stuck, or what are the shocking points in the supply chain. When you look into the Red Sea, when you look into the Suez Canal, and we are going through the Cape of Good Hope, that longer route, the consignments are getting delayed. We have supply side, elements mounting to the global inflation. So these things will work within the inflation targeting framework only if we are able to maneuver the expectations channel. And central bank, if you look into, there are empirical studies regarding that, the expectations channel, where they are, strictly or effectively maneuvering the inflation from the supply side shocks. Otherwise, we have to just confine to the monetary elements of the inflation. So this is a challenge of the central bank. To adding to that challenge, we need to look into the climate risk. And the narrative from the central bankers around the world is that we are not ready. We are not willing to get into the reputation risk by looking into the political economy questions of the climate change commitments because our tools are not ready. So that's a way, including Raghuram Rajan and other famous monetary economists are taking the stance that we will be focusing just on the price stability. But if that is the case, as Christine Lagarde of European Central Bank has mentioned, that unless we start greening of monetary policies, this climate change related risk and uncertainties will get into the financial instabilities, then it will be, the scenario will, blast. We won't be able to control anything that time unless we incorporate the stress test for the top investors or the elements of the climate related risk and uncertainties into the central bank reaction function. So it is not a business as usual scenario that you are focusing just on, the price stability. Then comes the issue of liquidity guidance. So are you able to provide enough liquidity so that the economic growth recovery can happen? So the liquidity guidance is at another. It is not that when you look into the central bank monetary policy function, it's all about pegging your interest rates or pegging your policy rates. There are elements much more than that, than just focusing on the price stability. So that's a scenario, and the Bank of England and many central bankers are now started the greening of monetary policies, but we have miles to go. And central government of India, if you ask me whether they are getting into the issues other than the price stability, of course yes, but they're looking into the statutory liquidity ratio, they're looking into the bond financing, and finally the prime lending, the priority lending. So within these three elements, they're not doing enough regarding the statutory liquidity ratio. That's fixed. There is no greening process or anything regarding that. Then the bond financing. Recently, we have announced that there will be a thematic financing by linking it to the green infrastructure. We have a thematic bond financing linking to the green infrastructure. Now, coming to the priority lending, RBI announced that certain sectors will be tied to the green infrastructure, and that's the way the narrative goes. Is it enough? It's not enough. But we have started the process, and in the recent RBI bulletin and our report of currency and finance, you can take a look into this monetary policy through a green lens, and those thought-provoking chapters are there in these recent publications. Now coming to the fiscal authorities, if you go ahead with the business as usual, that we have fiscal risk, we need to maintain the fiscal rules, the threshold ratios are fixed, then how do you tackle this polycrisis? Like if you are aiming for just the threshold ratio of 3%, or if you are curtailing the debt, the debt crisis is another crisis, a component of the polycrisis. So how do you view that debt crisis, which is a major component of polycrisis? So you go ahead with a threshold ratio of a public debt to GDP ratio strictly at 20 or 30%, or you maneuver your debt dynamics in such a manner that you're able to tackle the polycrisis. So these are the questions you need to ask. And central bank is partial in its effectiveness regarding the economic growth recovery outcome and in terms of the resilient climate change commitments, because we have a commitment, that we need to reach the net carbon emissions to zero by a particular year. But that transition has two components. One is the fiscal transition component, The next is the energy transition component. And these two transitions, the fiscal and the energy transitions, are closely correlated. And how the countries or the global economy is incorporating these two concerns within the fiscal rules. That's an important question to be asked. And when you frame this fiscal consolidation narrative, these twin transition mode, the fiscal and energy transitions, are incorporated within the consolidation procedures. When the European Union is talking about the excessive deficit procedure, are they willing to incorporate the concerns related to the energy and climate change transition? These are the new questions, the economists started asking now. And my answer is yes and no. If you're asking me if I am the policy maker or I am the fiscal authority, my prime concern is the fiscal rule, and I need to be fiscally disciplined so that the investors' confidence will not suffer. The animal spirits of the economy will go on. So this is the neoclassical stance. And if you are playing into the hands of the neoclassical economists, then the crisis is mounting and we will not be able to take the economy, the global economy, to the next level of transition. So that's the concern now related to this multiple crisis or the polycrisis. Now, how to re-articulate the fiscal rules? Now, if you're focusing just on the 3%, what is going to happen when the times of revenue uncertainties and when your revenue is not buoyant, then there is a high chance that you will curtail the spending related to the human development concerns, the climate change concerns, and other elements which are related to the social infrastructure. So if that is a mode in which we are operating, or if you're taking a sequential stance that these are the times of macroeconomic crisis, we need to tackle the macroeconomic crisis first and then sequentially get into the human development concerns or climatic change concerns. That sequential approach is going to pay us huge, and we need to take a simultaneous framework of the macroeconomic policy framework. And as Professor Joseph mentioned, and this is exactly what we are looking into by revising the core structure of the gift by looking into the concerns related to the polycrisis. And now, when you articulate the debt crisis, what are the important elements to be looked into? One is the level of the debt. The second is how you finance the debt. First, regarding the level of the debt, globally, we are not comfortable the way in which the debt is mounting. But, in some countries, it's above the GDP, but the debt to GDP ratio mounting to 80%, is it a matter of concern? So we started looking into the fiscal risk and started curtailing many spending in order to be fiscally disciplined. So is that approach welcome? So this is the first question you need to ask. The second question related to the levels, when you talk about the macroeconomic stability and growth process, rather than the levels of the deficit, you have to look into the macroeconomic parameters. Like if your country is growing, then the debt can be justified. So you need to look into the real rate of growth of the economy and the real cost of the debt. So if you can afford the debt and grow out of it, it's called the process. The term is called growing out of the debt, then you can afford. So you need to look into the R and G parameters, or you need to look into the threshold ratios. There was an articulation in European Union in terms of the Maastricht Treaty. There's an articulation across the emerging world in terms of threshold ratios of the debt we need to maintain. So if we move in that realm, will we be able to tackle the polycrisis? These are the questions to be asked, because we have seen what has happened in European Union. In European Union, when monetary policy was exogenous, it's not with the individual countries. When the monetary policy was exogenous, and on the top of that, when fiscal policy was given the narrative about the Maastricht Treaty of keeping the fiscal deficit to GDP at 3%, that harmed the countries. And we have seen how it has reflected into the Brexit and other issues in which, they were not able to tackle. And you can read some of the literature from the Institute of Fiscal Studies in UK. They have done quite a bit of work related to how this Maastricht Treaty or the fiscal thresholds that's affecting, or whether that itself led to the Brexit. These are the questions asked by the IFS papers. And these are the studies which we need to look into, because it is not about the cultural fissures or the identity fissures. They came together on the basis of an economic integration. Whether that worked as a project or not, whether European Union was a feasible project or not, these questions, were looked into by the scholars. And one paper you can look into is from the Brookings papers, that Harvard economist Alberto Alsina has written a paper on this, where the European Union was a feasible project. So this is the way, countries started looking or re-articulating the fiscal rules. And also the writings by Oliver Blanchard in the Peterson Institute of Economics in US. So these are the think tanks, the literature students need to look into, should also contain the policy research perspectives. And these think tanks papers will help you how to articulate, your concerns from a policy research perspective, because it is little different from academic research. We need to articulate to the policymakers. So that language is little different. And you get a flair of this literature if you look into the think tanks literature and Oliver Blanchard. So overall, the concern was like then, it was a low interest regime when we started talking about the re-articulation of fiscal rules. And in the times of low interest rate regime, we could have afforded a little more public debt to grow out of the crisis, but we didn't. But in the times of low interest rate regime, go for the high fiscal deficit or go for high debt, but it has to be closely linked to reducing the output gaps or to enhance the public infrastructure into the economy, which can crowd in the private investment. So that was the narrative. But now we need to do an interest rate defense. It's no longer, the party is over. So that's a terminology, or that's a one-liner in macroeconomic literature. Now the party is over. We can't keep the interest rates anymore at the lower mode. The interest rate is shooting up. When the party is over, when the interest rates is going hawkish, we can't talk about the debt the way we talked about in the times of low interest rate regime. And when new monetary policy framework was designed in India, that time, the inflation targeting was the main concern. You can look into the articulation by the Urjit Patel, his recommendations, his committee report. That articulation was inflation targeting. But there was a conflicting priority over there in terms of the public debt management. If the interest rate is shooting up, then your debt is going costlier. Then can you make the fiscal policy accommodative for the growth recovery process when your debt is mounting? How to tackle these conflicting priorities? So the job of the policymakers anywhere in the world now is not easy. It's quite tough. And, but the only dynamics is the monetary policy and fiscal policy coordination. That's the only way in which we tackle the growth recovery process. So when the interest rate is mounting, keeping the accommodative fiscal policy stance is, it's also getting tough. But if the central bank is also a public debt management authority, of course it is. But there is a conflict of interest over there. So these are the, the crisis, or these are the policy challenges, and the job is not that easy. So we need to wait and see if in the next Monetary Policy Committee, we are going to decrease the rate of interest or not, or we are going to keep it the status quo at 6.5%. The major reason is that now J. Powell is giving the right noise that he may decrease the rate of interest in the coming years. So if that is the case, then capital won't be flighty. We can conveniently decrease the interest rate so that, we can protect our growth recovery process. Because for the growth recovery process, the interest rate management, we need to keep it at the lower level so that, the investment can happen, the credit will be cheaper. So, when I open the floor, you can, deliberate on these concerns. On the one side, take the chair of the central bank governor, take the chair and you visualize yourself there. And on one side, you have a strict monetary framework mandate that is price stability. You will not be questioned if the growth recovery process is suffering, because by mandate, it is price stability. Okay, that's well and done. And we are questioning that. In the context of an emerging economy like India, can the central bank be focusing just on price stability? This is question number one. Second, as RBI governor, if you're increasing the interest rates, you have your own narrative for doing that, because there is mounting inflation. And till recently, or we have not heard any articulation yet, but the central bank of the Western world is on hawkish mode. If you don't keep it at par with them, the hot money will run to the economies in which the rate of interest is higher. We can't afford that capital flight, because we can afford X minus M current account deficit as long as we can finance that with the capital flows. But when the capital becomes flighty, we will be panic. Now, what about the negative interest rates? If the nominal interest rate is below the mounting inflation, then your real interest rate is negative. And the real interest rate is negative has important or significant negative consequences. So are we ready to tackle that? So we need to keep the interest rates high to avoid the negative interest rates. So ultimately, we need to bring down the inflation to the inflation anchor to avoid this. So to protect the capital away from being flighty, to protect the economy from getting into the negative interest rate mode, to tackle the mounting inflation, also to support the financialization of savings, because we need to keep the interest rates high for the financialization of savings. Otherwise, when we talk about the polycrisis, this digitization of the currency and the digital challenges are yet another. I forgot to mention in the beginning when I listed the crisis. So now they are getting into the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, because, the financialization of savings will suffer if the interest rates are not attractive. Then the people will move to the other forms of savings. And, the people are taking the challenges even in terms of high rate, high risk assets like crypto assets. So in our country, there is no legitimacy or legitimate framework for the crypto dealings. It is, of course, not a digital currency. It's a digital asset. It's high risk, high return asset. So what is that policy framework or the regulatory framework we need to put forward so that the entrepreneurs, when they do the cross-border transactions, or when the youngsters want to, deposit in high-risk, high-return assets, they won't be getting into the pish coins, and they will be having only the good coins. And what is that regulatory framework we have? In the G20 meetings, we have spoken about it, but it is not articulated well enough in terms of a black and white regulatory framework in the country or anywhere. So these are concerns along with the climate concerns, geopolitical concerns, and the energy crisis, this digital crisis, because, the more we get into the digital infrastructure, the more we get into the fruits of the innovation, the challenges are also huge. So what is that framework in the multilateral regime? What is that framework in the multilateral architecture to be looked into to tackle these issues or the challenges coming from the digitization of the crypto world? That is yet another. Now, if you look into the Indian economy, we have announced that 30% of the crypto dealings will be taxed. But the taxation policy is not articulated as making it legitimate, because we tax even the other speculative assets, like casino, horse race. We, do all the speculative assets taxation at 30%. So taxing the crypto is not making it legitimate. So what could be that regulatory framework to deal with the crypto is yet another concern. So business as usual, by looking into strict fiscal policy rules, like keeping your deficit at 3% and looking into the inflation targeting by keeping your central bank closely correlated to this price stability concerns, will not do a proper job in the times of the polycrisis. So, but how many central bank authorities or the policy makers opened their eyes and started looking into these concerns? If you ask me, it is highly fragmented. As I mentioned earlier, The prime objective is the rules-based macroeconomic policy realm. It's a rules-based. There is no discretionary power operating now because we have moved a lot ahead from that discretionary space of policymakers to a rules-based policy making. So within this rules-based policy making, if you ask me what are the tools and methodologies in which the central bank and the fiscal policy authorities dealing with the polycrisis, my answer is it is highly fragmented. So we need to look into the public financial management tools to get there. And instead of looking into the growth recovery process or those kind of stories, because these are most complex, cross-cutting set of challenges. And it is not the question of carbon budget versus fiscal budget. It is not the question of, the monetary versus fiscal. It's all the matter of the policy certainty and the policy coordination to get into these concerns. And, I stop here and open the floor for questions and listen to your questions. And then, let me take your concerns, and the next part of my lecture will be like fine-tuning to your concerns. Over to you. The floor is open. Ranjit.
Okay, thank you very much, Chechi, for the wonderful presentation. And I request all the students to interact. Now, floor is open for the students.
Hello, Professor Lekha. This is Nirmal. I would like to have quick observation regarding your talk. Can I?
Definitely, sure. Go ahead.
This is with the, topic of financialization, which I am very much interested on. So, the rising interest rates, the global interest rates, in tune with the so-called inflation targeting policy, is also leading to a rise in the financialization, right? But this has got ramifications of for countries like India, because I don't think, I have a feeling that the inflation targeting is also leading to, capital flows and inflows also. So, how financialization has impacted the global economy, especially the case of Indian economy, uh, is what bothers me, because I think there are very few works in this area, right? So I just want to have a quick look at that concept with regard to financialization.
Thank you, Nirmal. I'll collect the questions and answer in the end. Okay.
Good morning, ma'am. This is Steffi. Ma'am, you were talking about like true transitions that has an important role to play in fiscal rules and fiscal consolidation. That's fiscal transition and energy transition. So I would like to know how energy transition has a role to play in setting fiscal rule and consolidation.
Okay. My paper with Emmanuel Thomas, it is just up. It was published yesterday in NIPFP. It will be coming from the Levy Economic Institute as well. I will forward it to Steffi. That's one of my papers, and other papers related to this just transition aspects, which is published in NIPFP. I'll forward to you that climate, but I will explain to you. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Hi, ma'am. This is Dr. Ashwati. I'm assistant professor here. With respect to the US Fed Reserve rate hinting that you mentioned, that they are going hawkish.
Yeah.
But in the inflation dynamics of the developed economies and the developing economies, especially the Asian economies, are very different. So in the framework of the poly crisis, where do you place it exactly?
Oh, great. Yeah. Thank you, Ashwati. Good. Go ahead. You have some supplementary questions?
not belongs to this question.
Tell me.
Regarding the Steffi's question, I just want
Who
to.
is speaking now?
I'm Ritik. I'm a first year.
Ritik.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
First
First year
First year research scholar.
research scholar, PhD.
PhD.
Good. Okay.
Okay. Ma'am, regarding the energy transition aspect, and we, India, we are having a low consumption, energy consumption.
Mm.
And the regarding the targets which put by the UN agencies and all, and this is really the time for us to go for more coal-based energy usage and all, because we are having that much low energy consumption and also what should be our focus regarding the energy transition.
Okay, good. Yeah.
One more question regarding, ma'am has mentioned about the European Union and
Yeah.
the exogenous monetary policy and the 1992 treaty regarding the 3% fiscal uh, debt, the fiscal consolidation rules and all. There is a similar case in India also, right? Because our case is also like we are also going to a stressed fiscal state regarding these fiscal rules and all.
Mm.
That's the one thing. And the low interest rate regime, like Japan is an example. Like they have a high debt, uh, debt to GDP ratio and a low interest. What are the constraints when we follow that kind of a model? Like they have that public infrastructure and all, so a low interest and a high debt scenario. How can we move? How can look that? So,
Brilliant. Thank you.
Hi, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Meghna. My question is regarding what you have just spoken about crypto assets and there not being a proper regulatory mechanism for them. So don't you think along with crypto assets, there's a sector which is growing of decentralized finance where the lending and borrowing of these tokens are happening? Don't you think even that should also be regulated along with the crypto assets? Because
Absolutely.
at present, India, I don't think any other country also does have a proper regulatory mechanism even for that. And also, if you look at reports, India has a high, what do you say, the sector is also growing. So don't you think it's around time that we start talking about it and thinking about a regulatory mechanism for it?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Meghna.
Hi, ma'am.
Yeah.
I have certain queries regarding this aspect of policy coordination, especially with respect to Indian context.
Who is speaking now?
Ma'am Aditya.
Hi, Aditya. Go ahead.
So you have speak about this threshold and its impact that is basically hurting the policy space of fiscal policy in responding to the crisis, basically. So in that respect, if we can see, the empirical literatures have clearly pointed towards a pro-cyclicality in the expenditure trends where whenever there is a fiscal rule. And the Indian context, whenever there is a pro-cyclicality is found, what happens is that the policy basically, the fiscal expansion basically cuts on the capex and is focusing more on uh, mm, the revenue expenditure side only. So how come that can be translated into a possible increase in the growth, and how it will facilitate the the realization of deficits which can be covered over the time? That is one question. The second thing you have says that a lower interest rate, in a situation of lower interest rate, there is a chance for going for higher fiscal deficit where it can be utilized for the capital expenditure. But when it comes to the case of zero lower bound, the increasing of fiscal deficit is not more possible. So in that particular respect, if we can say the interest rate settings, basically in the inflation targeting regime, inflation, the interest rate setting will be basically on depending on certain other variables also. Because if the inflationary environment is not favorable for interest rate changes. And
Mm.
in that particular space, if the fiscal uh, deficit situation is particularly stressed, so
Mm.
that situation, especially what we are facing, the stressed fiscal space with increased inflationary pressures, and also you have said the partial impact of monetary policy on its transmission towards output. So how
Mm.
can it be conjoined together? Because taken, the Indian economy is considered as a supply constraint. So
Mm.
fiscal policy is bounded to have its impact, or bounded to take the lead for the economic rejuvenation, especially in the long run perspective, where monetary policy can only be effective in smoothing the short run fluctuations. So
Mm.
can we conjoin the fiscally stressed situation with the inflationary pressures, and how the policy responses have to be made, especially given the challenges of energy transition, the
Mm.
cases of the fiscal consolidation and all those things. Thank you.
Mm. Thank you, Aditya. When you speak, your friends will be able to connect or understand better. As a teacher, I spoke, but when you articulated it, maybe youngsters can connect to Aditya's narrative. He has highlighted many important points, which also I flagged in my lecture. We will take it up. Let me listen to a few more questions from your friends. Then I will get back to your question. Ask.
Any questions?
Ask. Even one line will be, I will be very happy. Ask.
Ma'am, can you
Yeah.
elaborate more on interest rates and capital flight?
Sure. Who is asking?
I'm Anand.
Anand, you just joined a gift, right?
Yeah.
Anand, the question is over. It's just about the link between the interest rates and the capital flight.
Yes.
Okay. Where did you, do your post-graduation?
I did it in Kerala University.
Okay, good. I am? Tell me.
I'm a commerce student. I did my PG in Kerala University.
Oh, commerce student. Wonderful. Okay, because you will be able to understand the balance sheet better than this economist. Okay. We need you.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi, madam. This
Yeah.
is Joel.
Goel.
Joel.
Joel. Oh, hi.
Hi,
Yeah.
madam.
Yeah.
So my concern is that you have spoken about the inflation expectation channel of monetary policy transmission.
Mm.
So with respect to that of a country like India, which is supply constrained, the main point with respect to this expectation channel is that by formulating a policy rate, monetary policy is able to engineer the expectation of that of people, and it will be able to prevent some sort of a second round effect. That is what this expectation channel means, basically.
Yeah.
So I would like to know that whether it is functioning in a proper way in India, because up to what extent this
Mm.
policy rate, which is being charged by monetary authority, able to shape the decisions of a common man.
Mm.
Because what interest rate changes or fluctuations, what actually means to them, whether that signaling is properly happening in India or not. I would like to know your take about that.
Good.
Thank you.
Joel was a political economy person last time also. Common man. He asked the technical questions, but he will, put an element about the political economy question as well. Leader.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
I'm Nivedita.
Hmm.
So, ma'am, my question is my current research is on international reserve accumulation and its macroeconomic policy, macroeconomic implications for emerging market economies. So,
Nivedita, repeat your topic, with whom you are working this topic. You're into the second or third year of your PhD?
Second year, ma'am.
Second year. Oh, yeah, okay. With whom you're working in this topic?
I'm working with the Anubis Kumar.
Anubis Kumar. Okay.
Yeah.
The topic is?
International reserve accumulation.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's macroeconomic implications for emerging
Sure.
economies.
Okay. Tell
So,
me.
yeah, my research problem is like these emerging market economies are holding more than the optimal level of forex reserves, and it has a macroeconomic implication. Basically, inflation and I am focusing on inflation and exchange rate volatility implication. So, I would like to find out the threshold impact of this forex reserves on this inflation and exchange rate volatility. So, in an emerging market economy context. So I want to know your take on this.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think questions are all from the floor. You can.
Ranjit, thank you. Thank you so much for this brilliant questions. And I felt happy that, I am heard much, that's the satisfaction I have when you ask these questions. Thank you so much. So let me, tell me, Ranjit, one more question.
Ma'am, actually, I have a small clarification.
Suma, yeah.
So as you mentioned in the beginning, like for any policy action, like we should take into account the structural differences of the economy. So in that context, I would like to know, like to what extent, like we are accommodating the, like in Indian context, the structure of the economies while setting the fiscal consolidation policies. My question is in terms of targeting this growth and climate risk. So how are we going to address these issues? Because we have already issues with regard to the fund devolution. Now that issues are going on for the 16th Finance Commission. So like we have a larger goal of targeting this climate risk, right? So how are we going to address these issues? Thank you.
Oh, great. Yeah, sure. One more question. Yes, it's 11th question. Tell me. Good.
So you have said that with the advent of inflation targeting, basically the policy.
Who is speaking?
Yeah, Aditya, ma'am.
Aditya, tell me. Yeah.
So with respect to this inflation targeting, the policies will be either hawkish or dovish with respect to changes in the inflationary pressures, right? So when it comes to inflationary pressures, when the policy is taking a hawkish stance, basically it cuts the fiscal deficit stance because it will increase. But when it is a hawkish stance, it will also stimulate a capital inflow. So sterilizing the inflow while managing the debt of the fiscal authority will be double whammy, like a double whammy for central bank is managing the debt, but central bank is also sterilizing the impact of the capital inflow. So how come that affects the transmission mechanism of monetary policy as well as the fiscal policy with respect to its impact on the output as well as on its impact on the inflationary pressures in the second round effect?
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Aditya. You're always brilliant. Thank you so much. So it is not like I am showing any favoritism or anything. So let me club Suma's question on the structural challenges and Aditya's first question related to the pro-cyclicality and the question he raised right now. So if I start from that analytical framework, then the rest of the questions I can fit into within this analytical framework. Okay. So it's structural and the cyclicality. That's a point you have raised right now. In the context of emerging economies, this cyclicality, the extreme focus on the cyclicality is not working. And as Uma mentioned, it is high time to look into the structural issues of an economy. That point by Aditya and Suma, this is well taken, this point. You can take a look into that work by Geeta Gopinath. That title of the paper is Cyclist Trend. Then another work by Valeria, Saxena and Valeria in IMF. That's in the post-pandemic period. They looked into this question of cyclicality versus, the structural issues. So the basic question they asked is, the typical way in which we look into the economy to analyze the growth process through the business cycles, that's no longer working. So they look into this econometric issues from, that random walk methodology and all, stationarity test and the random walk. And the students can easily look into these questions and they can do the paper in the context of India, because the papers existing now, it's in the context of Mexico. In India, we need to do that work. And I'm waiting for a research scholar who can look into these questions, following the works by Gita Komida, that cyclist trend, and also by the Valeria. So I met her in IMF. Valeria, that time she was the IMF capacity building then head. Valeria also was interested in looking into these questions in the context of India. So that was a simple econometric methodology. So if we are getting a result that, the dating the business cycles, that's no longer, going to be very valid for the context of an emerging economy like India, then there is no meaning in dating your business cycle, like what is a downturn, what is an upturn, and then, the coercing the policies from the center bank and from the fiscal policy authorities to get into the counter-cyclical policy mode. So that's no longer going to work. Then we need to think in terms of the structural, which, Suma was highlighting, that we need to look into the hysteresis. So these papers, they also raise the concern of looking into the growth recovery process from the point of view, not of the business cycles, but from the point of view of hysteresis, the dependence of the short term on the long term. So that could be an analytical methodology or an analytical framework students can look into when you study the polycrisis. One. Second, the size of the government. And, Suma again pointed out that we have to look into the intergovernmental fiscal transfer mechanisms, not only the level of governments like, union or the subnational governments, but also there is a mechanism of the intergovernmental fiscal transfer. So that's very well taken. So how to look into these questions? So that is the next thing. You need to look into the question of the size of the government. The size of the government and the globalization. Is this directly related or inversely related? This was a question asked by my first PhD student, Mithun. And this, question is relevant. And now in the times of polycrisis, what is the link between the polycrisis and the size of the government? So this is another research question that students can take a look into. Now, coming to the elements of it. We fix the analytical framework of the growth process. It is not the business cycles, but the hysteresis. So that's the first understanding about the analytical framework. Now get into the different components of the policies. One is the fiscal and the other is the monetary, and third is international economics. And most of the questions asked by the students are related to this, the center bank questions. So let me go from Aditya's and Suma's question into this. Again, the question raised by Aditya related to the transmission mechanisms and also the point highlighted by Joel about the expectations channel. Let us get into the center bank question. As rightly pointed out by Joel and Aditya, expectations channel, if they fail, what is the sanctity of inflation targeting framework? Are we able to control the inflation framework or inflation if the expectation channel is no longer working? Brilliant question. Second, the point raised by Aditya is, though there will be a policy announcement related to the policy rates or the repo rates, but if your transmission mechanism, the monetary transmission mechanism fails to work, then what is its repercussion? Then Nirmal asked the question of the financialization of savings. Will that be, that capital flows, will that be able to tackle, the macroeconomic stabilization function? So let me take these questions together. Yes and no. My colleague Rudrani Bhattacharya has a paper looking into this question, whether inflation targeting framework is able to maneuver the expectations channel. And her finding is the expectations channel is not working in the context of India. So that is my reference to the question about the expectations channel. And there are different channels: credit channel, interest rate channel, expectations channel. But the overall, the relative prices, that we are failing to control that through the expectations channel. Then going back from the inflation targeting to the previous mode, will that be sufficient? That's a kind of a Brownian motion that we are getting into this impossible trinity. We are getting into the inflation management, exchange rate management, regulatory mechanism. So what all functions RBI can do? Now it is very neat. The MPC will come. They just announce their repo rates down and up, and they go back. It's so clear. The policy making, the narrative is so clear, and the journalist world is just focusing on writing about the price stability when we talk about the inflation targeting. But it's high time to get back to the discretionary space from this rules-based phase in order to do a greening of monetary policy, and also to get into the supply chain disruptions, which is rightly highlighted by Aditya and Joel. The supply chain disruptions that's happening not only from the internal markets, but also from the external markets after the geopolitical wars and uncertainties. Because as I mentioned earlier, in now the supply chain, the choking points in the sea, Red Sea, in the Suez Canal, due to the climate and the war concerns, now things are all happening through the Cape of Good Hope. So it has got its own, contribution to the mounting global inflation. So those kind of supply chain disruptions, the energy crisis, the oil price crisis. So the elements of inflation coming from these are not getting maneuvered through repo rate adjustments. Repo rate adjustments is just focusing disproportionately onto the monetary elements of inflation. In the case of India, inflation is not strictly or significantly monetary. So that concern is very well taken. Now, let me take up the question of Steffi related to the just transition, the fiscal and energy transition. So we have written the paper about that. And also the question raised by Dr. Ritik, Ritik, the first year PhD student, he also asked about how to do a just transition from this coal-based energy to the non-convention. What are the ways in which we can, the CBAM policies are also very important now. The carbon border adjustment, which was introduced by the European Union. Now, the question here is about energy poverty. As Ritik mentioned, if you look into the consumption, energy consumption, it is very high in the Western world, not in our emerging world. But when it comes to the narrative of the net carbon zero, you're coercing the developing countries or the emerging countries to move away from the fossil-based energy to non-fossil-based energy sources. So this energy transition need to be just. So if you're doing that overnight, then we are getting into the energy poverty. So these are the questions, we should be talking at the high table, but the high table, the narratives or the arguments of the bargaining is happening in terms of, getting overnight into a non-coal, non-fossil fuel-based economy. Are we ready to do that? Because we will face energy crisis then, energy poverty then. Now, there are studies which looked into the plausible fiscal cost if we are moving away from the fossil fuel-based taxes. So that study was done by Ravish Bhandari, that Brookings Institute, it is renamed now. Ravish Bhandari and Rajat, they have looked into that question, what is the fiscal cost, the fiscal transition cost if you move away from the fossils-based taxes. So that you can take a look into. Then another work by myself and Emmanuel, we looked into the tax buoyancy of the extractive industries, because when we talk about Ritik's question about this energy transition, we need to look into the fossil fuel-based taxes and also the royalties or the extractive industries. There is a state-business relations over there. And the business world is giving or augmenting the state's exchequer through a state-business relation for extracting the revenue. So what is that? What is a transition that's going to happen there and how it is going to affect the state exchequer? So then we can start with the baseline buoyancy estimates to understand, these questions. What we have to identify is a regime shift. Because these taxes, across globe, if you look into, these taxes are, are maneuvered into unit-based or ad valorem or profit-based regime. So in India, for the, if you look into the extractive sector related taxes, in India, there was a transition for most of this taxes or the royalties from the unit based or the run of mine ore, that pit mouth value based on the unit regime or the tonnage regime to ad valorem regime. Ad valorem in the sense like you are linked to a international price, or it is market linked when it comes to an ad valorem taxation regime. But that is quite plausible than when you look into the tonnage base or the production based regime. Now in the Western world, if you look into the Western Australia, that's the best model to study the extractive industry world, because there's Western Australia that mining taxation and all, it's counted as one of the best in the world, the way they link the tax rate and the tax base and come up with a number. So there also the question you have to ask is the transition towards profit regime will work. Like based on the profits you will be paid to the government, but that will be highly volatile because the profit regime will not be a stable regime. India has not got into that. We are still in the ad valorem regime related to this. So we looked into these questions related to the extractive sector, and I have done a work with Tata and this company, Vedanta, long back, because their concern was like, they are into this extractive mining business, okay? The question is related to the sustainability. The question is related to the human development concerns and the climate-related concerns. So what was done in India is like cashing in on oil, the way the African countries have done. A part of it is earmarked for tackling the environment concerns. Will you be happy with this transition? That you keep on extracting, but you will earmark a portion of your extracted revenue, the royalties, to tackle the environment concerns, or you plow it back to the districts or the regions from which you extract the mineral. And in India, we followed up this cashing in on oil kind of concept, or the black empowerment, economic empowerment, that kind of policy initiatives in South Africa. We also mildly followed it up in India by forming an earmarking of the taxes, by putting the district mineral fund and all. But these are not the ways to tackle the polycrisis in terms of climate change concerns. So we need to look into when you talk about the energy transition, we need to look into the fossil fuels based taxes. We need to look into the extractive sector based taxes. We also need to look into the earmarking of the taxes. Where the earmarking is the first best principle to deal with the energy transition. Then the final one is the power sector. We can't do anything without talking about the power sector. When we talk about the fiscal and energy transition, the power sector is very important. And how the power sector is dealt with within the fiscal consolidation procedure, now in the post-pandemic fiscal space, we have raised the threshold ratios of the fiscal deficit to GDP for the state governments to 3.5 instead of 3. And this 0.5 extra borrowing space is linked to the power sector reforms. And also this is related to the structural reforms, because Suma raised a question of that structural reforms. This is structural reform. Whether the subnational governments are dealing with this structural or this energy transition within the fiscal consolidation framework effectively. That's another way of looking into it, in addition to the fossil-based taxes, extractive taxes and all. The power sector and the fiscal consolidation procedure. This is another chunk of literature to understand fiscal transition and energy transition. There, you get into the dashboard to look into the efficiency parameters of the power sector. We have some indicators for the financial efficiency parameters and the operational efficiency parameters. And each of these efficiency parameters are proxied by certain indicators. Like in the financial efficiency parameter, we need to look into the aggregate technical and commercial loss across states. We need to look into the gap between the aggregate cost and the aggregate revenue. We look into the tariff revisions. So there is a norm, like it should not be above 15%, this aggregate AT&C losses. So if you look into the state differentials, some states are doing well. They can avail the extra borrowing space, but some states are not doing good in terms of even the efficiency parameters in terms of your power infrastructure, like smart metering, disaggregating the grid for the commercial and the, household purpose, 100% electrification of villages. So this story of the power sector is quite compelling in the context of India, in the sense we have generated power which is sufficient for 100% electrification of villages. But the problem is the DISCOM, the distribution companies, are in a mess. So state finances got into, protecting this DISCOMs. They carried their mess to the state governments through these non-SLR bonds we created, like Uday bonds and all. Then we started looking into the Uday debt or the non-Uday deficit, like that, RBI state finances. If you look into, you can get the structural deficit and non-structural deficit. These questions we started asking, but at the end of the day, state finances got deteriorated further because we supported the power sector companies. But if you look into the efficiency and financial and operational efficiency parameters, nothing has happened. There is no energy transition. There is no efficiency in the energy parameters. So these are the different components. We can't talk about the fiscal and energy transitions without talking about the power sector debt. This also, we are getting into the public sector borrowing requirement. This is also closely correlated to the fiscal transition. When we talk about the fiscal transition, what is a parameter which we are focusing? Fiscal deficit or the public sector borrowing requirement? That's another kind of a deficit, which if we are getting into the public sector PSBR, then the question is wider. And Kerala is grappling with that. In the net borrowing ceiling, the public sector entities borrowing is also now considered. It is not considered as an off-budget liability, which is shrinking the fiscal space in retrospect. So that's affecting our fiscal consolidation procedure, because our fiscal space is getting shrunk, because in retrospect, we were asked to control that, and they calculated even that OBB within the net borrowing ceiling, and the Supreme Court we have gone into. So these questions are closely related, the power, the fiscal, and the energy transitions. And we can look into these questions, and also the energy transition can be looked into from the financial stability perspectives. And twice a year, RBI published that financial stability report. So we can also take a look into that financial stability report and whether they contain that climate risk. How this financial stability report, that perception is maneuvered. I also get that questionnaire, like it is based on a perception survey. Like, how do you perceive the risk in future, or the central bank and the fiscal authorities, how they perceive the risk? It's based on a perception survey. And I also participate in this perception survey. And one of the questions is related to the climate. But now, if you look at that perception survey, more than this geopolitical war or uncertainties, the climate change is coming up as an important perception survey-based risk. Like, we have started identifying climate risk at the top. So the question of climate change needs to be tackled, but the tools are getting ready. It's not completely, tackling. The picture is yes and no regarding the effectiveness of greening of monetary policies or the greening of fiscal policies. Regarding the greening of fiscal policies, that intergovernmental fiscal transfers should also take into consideration of a variable related to the green economy. We have incorporated the concept related to the forest car, but I think the 16th Finance Commission will take up this issue much more substantively to look into this climate change related concerns. That is the ecological fiscal transfers. That is very important. It is not only about the greening of monetary policies and the stress test by the central bank. The fiscal policy authorities also need to be doing this greening of fiscal policy by getting into ecological fiscal transfers and also getting into the public financial management tool like climate responsive budgeting. And I heard that Mr. Balagopal committed to the climate budget in the context of Kerala. I was a member of that National Adaptation Communication of India, the first National Adaptation Communication, and we identified the 8 components related to the adaptation. And we need to map that 8 components of adaptation to the budgetary commitments and to find out with an ought to be budget sufficient enough to address these concerns of the 8 components of adaptation. It is not only, it's exposed, like you open the budget, how much the government is spending on climate change. No, we need to do an ex-ante climate responsive budgeting by looking into these 8 components, which includes even, all the natural disasters. You look into the adaptation. Even agriculture sector is very prominent when you look into this adaptation, communication. So that paper by NIPFP, it is like public expenditure requirements for the first national adaptation communication in India. So that work by NIPFP, that's there in the website. You can take a look into that. So that's about the climate concerns. Okay. Now, we have talked about the overall macroeconomic framework, the question addressed by Aditya on the procyclicality and Suma's question. We have looked into the climate change concerns asked by Steffi and, Rutik. Now I have to answer. One moment. Ritik, I answered. Steffi, Meghna's question on the crypto. You are right. When we talk about this crypto mechanism, we also need to look into the questions related to the decentralized finance. But I don't know whether Meghna will agree with me when I say that don't say no to an innovation. Because in the field of money and finance, innovations happen. Like we are no longer into that, king giving a purse of coins to us. We have moved from the field of that in the money and finance to the crypto. So as you mentioned, regulatory framework is important rather than banning the crypto altogether or even the other coins. That's a stance I also take, in the sense it's an innovation and innovations will help us. But the ethical question, whether we should be earning money through speculation, that ethical question individually one can answer. But overall, from the macroeconomic point of view, don't say no to an innovation. Don't ban crypto, but go for a regulation. That's a stance I will take. But regulations in the sense, taxation is not making it legitimate. We need to go ahead with an international or a multilateral architecture concerning the crypto. Now, the question of crypto versus CBDC. When we talk about the digitized dollar, you take a look into that paper by Barry Aiken-Green. He has written about the digital dollar. It's in the Project Syndicate. Project Syndicate is a wonderful, page or a blog. Students can read, the policy or the wider audience related macroeconomic concerns over there. Even the geopolitical and ecological concerns, there are good papers in Project Syndicate. So there, a paper by Barry Aiken-Green. So he looked into the digitized dollar. It was like a pro paper for digitization. Janet Yellen mentioned, the Treasury Secretary, she mentioned that the digitization will improve financial inclusion. Of course, we need to tackle the digital divide in the context of an emerging economy. That's different. But she was, taking a viewpoint that digitization or the digital dollar is important for financial inclusion. So in India, if you look into that question of financial inclusion and CBDC, because we have introduced central bank digital currency, which is a legalized digital tender, legalized digital tender, but not a speculative asset. So CBDC, if that helps in the financial inclusion, that's a new kind of research students can take a look into. Because one, digitization will help in the cross-border transactions easily. The transaction cost is getting reduced. But if you don't have a proper regulatory framework, then terrorism and many unwanted things can happen, because it's a trust-based model. So that question of a trust-based model, that's very important to look into. And CBDC, in contrast to what Meghna spoke about, the decentralized blockchain finance, CBDC is a centralized finance. So getting more and more into CBDC means, again, the question of data privacy comes. So it's like decentralized finance and technology related issues, one. Second, whether it is increasing the financial inclusion or not, two. Third, how it is affecting the cross-border transactions, whether it is helping the entrepreneurs or not, four. The next point is, whether the data privacy that's protected or not. Because if you are using the central bank digital currency, and I always tell my students, like, if you're going for a globe trotting, Meghna and myself, like, you can easily track the way which we use a CBDC, right? But how much you can get into the privacy of a person, these are the questions. But I'm for digital infrastructure, because if there is no digital divide, along with the social infrastructure and physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure will boost the economy. But when you are given a huge technological innovation, then the crisis and the questions related to the potential threats also matter. And Meghna, I would love to add one more point is AI, the artificial intelligence into it. And that is like, which are the jobs which are going to get replaced and how it is going to help the researchers. These are the new questions we need to tackle when it comes to the question of artificial intelligence. Now, let me take the question of Nivedita. Of course, in the context of the international economics, international macro model, in the open economy model, in India, if you ask me, is there any relevance for Forex? I am compelled to say that the way I value Forex is by tagging it to the number of weeks I can afford to support my imports. So that is one way of looking into it. Otherwise, for me, if the component of the Forex, if I look into and the portfolio investment, and if the hot money component of that Forex is significant and huge, it is fickle. Anytime it responds to the interest rate differentials, as you mentioned. So the exchange rate mechanisms and the interest rate mechanisms will matter. Then, as a policy maker, if I am in the center bank of, RBI, if I am in RBI, if I am asked to take a decision, Nivedita, should I get into the exchange rate mechanisms? Or as, Aditya mentioned, should I get into the sterilization functions and all, or should I do my interest rate defense? As RBI governor, what I should be doing? This is a question which we need to answer. And most of the times, we do an interest rate defense, and I'm quite satisfied with that. Because when the rupee had a free fall, we allowed the rupee to go for a free fall. We didn't have this huge high frequency interventions. We allowed the rupee to settle at the natural, point. But we did an interest rate defense. That's quite plausible. But you can counter argue with me, Nivedita. But for me, it's quite plausible because this fluctuations or the volatility in my Forex market was due to the interest rate differentials. Okay, so if I tackle that interest rate differentials, then that volatility can be stemmed. The other way of dealing with this crisis is the capital controls. And in 2013, when we faced the Forex crisis, you remember we did a capital defense, capital control. It didn't work well for us, the capital controls. So learning by doing, overall what worked for India was interest rate defense. And that's the way I look at it, rather than intervening continuously in the exchange rate management, and the other stuff. So let me do my interest rate defense. But now the question raised by Nirmal will haunt me. The moment I do my interest rate defense, I am not supporting any growth recovery process. And I do believe that the financialization of savings is going to help, which has not helped me. Because again, the part of that capital I'm receiving, it may be fickle. It will anytime go the moment interest rate fluctuations happen. So it's not that, a story which is very good for the policymakers around the world. Everybody is learning by doing. But, women tend to go a little hawkish. That's the way studies showed. You know why? The moment your output gap is narrow, output gap in the sense the potential and the actual output in terms of employment or in terms of growth, if that output gap is narrow, then in the inflation targeting framework, the other concern is your mounting inflation, right? As I mentioned earlier, I will recollect that for you. You peg your interest rate based on inflationary expectations and the output gap, right? So the moment output gap is narrow, the women, if they are into board, if they are at the top of the central bank, they go hawkish because they can focus on the mounting inflation. So that's the way literature says, like in public choice and all, you can take a look into this carrier theories, that such kind of literature. So if you ask me whether I'm a person who is a hawkish person, it depends. It depends on my output gap. The moment the output gap is narrow, I may go hawkish. Otherwise, this output gap is a matter of concern. But the moment I say output gap, it's again controversial. Again, I'm getting back to the question of Aditya regarding the cyclicality. The moment I say that there is no business cycles in India or in the emerging world, then this potential output concept itself will break. Potential output is like you are getting into this actual and the potential output gap, which is, cyclical, which is negative and positive, that cyclicality. So that is another concern. And this is a fallacy of macroeconomic policy framework that North Bloc or any country, fiscal authorities and the monetary policy authorities are still using output gap, the difficult macroeconomic variable, to form their policy making. So this is another question we need to ask. And this question is also, you can take a look into the works by Valeria. She also questioned this concept of output gap. That's another literature which you can take a look into. Why this output gap, the cyclicality, is not a helpful construct for macroeconomic policymakers, especially in the emerging world. Now, I answer the questions by Aditya. Of course, that Anand's question is also answered, when I was answering Nivedita's question, Anand's question on interest rates and capital. Then Joel's expectations channel I answered. Now, Ashwati's question about Fed going hawkish. I can't agree with you more. In the times of polycrisis, if the Fed Reserve is in the hawkish mode, then it is coercing the entire world to be into a recessionary trend, because all other emerging economies, we are getting adjusted to the policies taken by the Fed Reserve. So one central bank, you can take a look into the works by Rubini, Norel Rubini. Of course, Adam Tooze I mentioned earlier, Stimson. So these works will give you a clear view that how, especially Rubini's papers, you take a look into Rubini's works, it will give you an idea that one Fed Reserve in this world, how it is, what do you call, significantly affecting the policy making of the emerging economies and getting into this, recessionary trend. And the only good news is, in the post-pandemic regime, so far, we allowed the fiscal policy to remain accommodative. But now with the mounting interest rates, we opened our eyes and the party is over. But the only positive thing was that monetary policy was partially in its outcome in terms of its effectiveness in the growth recovery process. So the only process was that we allowed our fiscal policy to remain accommodative. Let there be high deficit, let there be high debt, if you can closely tie that to overcome the recession or to overcome the the crisis. So that's the only good thing that has happened. And with that note, I close my lecture. Thank you.
So we'll come to the last part of our session, saying vote of thanks. I think we really had a very thought-provoking morning now. Professor Lekha Chakraborty has delivered a detailed and very insightful lecture on macroeconomic policies response to polycrisis. On behalf of the GIFT community, I would like to thank Professor Lekha Chakraborty for that wonderful lecture, hoping it spurred a contemplation on various macro dimensions of issues of our scholars, particularly those who are working in macro issues. And personally, I got some idea when she mentioned debt crisis is a subset of polycrisis and her extension on that. I've been following her articles from my, PhD days 8 years back. So still it is going on. So thank you, ma'am, for setting the stage. And next, I would appreciate our director, who's consistently bringing eminent scholars like Professor Lekha Chakraborty for provoking our scholars. Thank you, sir. And I could see the presence of some of these scholars from Madras School of Economics, particularly Matthew and Erin. I thank them for joining online. And I also thank our faculties and non-teaching staff, particularly our technical staff, Varun and Abhilash, for their constant support and support. Now, Vrinda also. And last but not the least, our scholars patiently listened the lecture and raised almost 13 questions to the resource person. I thank all of you, and thanks once again. We look forward to see another lecture, special lecture by a distinguished personality. Next. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Ranjit. I hope to come over to the campus because I want to see Hrithik and his friends, in person. I'll come over when I come. Hopefully in Kochivirunal or that Vishu time, I will be there and hope to be there. And as usual, Ashkar ഇത്തവണ ഒന്നും ചോദിച്ചില്ല മിണ്ടാതിരിക്കുകയാണ്. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coordinating everything so well, and all the best. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you, Ranjit. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chichi. Have a nice
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.